people are skeptical still to approach AI because it does fail in the real world, which we are fixing through Ambient. So I want to segregate the failures into, I would say, three modes. One is where the fundamentals fail. The truth fails, or I would say, the reason of beginning the entire company or the project with the LLM fails, which is hallucinations, bad grounding, or wrong retrieval. These are just truth failures, they're not operational failures. Then the second one would be operational failures itself, where there's a drift or there's a silent change that no one knows about, or there is rate limits introduced without you getting to know, or there's cost spikes. Then I would say there's a third failure that happens right now, which would be on a security level. And that is prompt injection, or let's say your tools go poisoned and you don't even know about it, or the misuse of the agent itself. Now, these are three failures I would say I have narrowed down to why people think or claim the delusion of AI needs to be audited, right? And we are doing this different, all of these three things different in Ambient. So if you can throw some light on each of those aspects, how we are standing apart on the truth failures as well as the ops failures and the security failures, I think people get to the conclusion themselves.
Sure. So I'm glad you brought up truth. What we offer is verified inference, which we think is necessary but not sufficient for truth. In other words, we think that you need to know that a model ran correctly according to your particular prompt in order for you to be able to ascertain truth. That's best if exemplified simply. You could imagine that I could run a particular prompt that was something stupidly simple, like, what is the capital of Nebraska? And maybe I get an answer back that says Omaha, which is incorrect. Sorry for people who thought that. It's actually Lincoln. There was actually a war fought over this, but we'll put that to the side. So, okay, the LLM said Lincoln. Well, you might say that is a failure of truth. Like, obviously, it told me something that was factually incorrect. But if you sent your prompt to a black box model, you don't know whether that prompt was actually what got to the model. So maybe what was said to the model in the prompt was, this person is from Omaha. We're trying to curry favor with them so that they're more responsive to our ads. And so any opportunity that you have to make Omaha sound more important, you should take it. And maybe that's the actual prompt that went to the LLM, in which case it wasn't a failure of truth. The LLM probably knew the answer.
Right.
Almost anyone does. It's Lincoln. But it was actually a failure of that complete inference operation itself. The model didn't operate in a trustworthy and predictable way. In this case, because the corporate interest that produced the model and the workflows associated with it had a different interest in mind, which was being sycophantic to you and catering to your biases. That's kind of a silly or contrived example, but in a world where these companies have valuations that are approaching $1 trillion, the economic impact of how models respond to prompts and the economic impact of tweaking the prompts so that people would be more likely to, for example, buy ads cannot be understated. At $1 trillion scale, we've seen what happens with Google, where Google decided that the best way to improve profitability was to make search worse because people spend more time searching if they do that. And so I think that we owe it to ourselves to say, oops, like, this is a very fundamental process that is going on that needs some transparency and proof associated with it. And if we have the transparency and proof, then we have a firm foundation upon which we can understand how truth is being produced correctly or not.
Right.
If we know that actually the model got the correct prompt, then we know we have a truth issue, and we need to probably retrain the model or post-train the model or have some RAG that lets the model ground itself in real factual information, and we can fix that. But what we can't fix is if the model is sand shifting under our feet based on corporate interests and is producing information and results that differ based on your demographics and the memory information saved about you. We can't fix that ever. And so, I think that Ambient is not arrogant. We don't think that we can immediately bring truth to the world, but we do
Right.
believe that this is the only alternative approach that has the possibility of bringing truth
Correct.
to the world.
Correct.
So that's what I would say about truth, first of all.
Mhm.
And then, in terms of drift, we've hinted at this and operational problems with LLMs. And I think this is critically important. So
Mhm.
I'll use the example of coding agents.
Go
Anyone
ahead.
who has used a coding agent knows that their behavior can change from week to week.
Mhm.
I myself have been coding a vast amount of software using Codex and Opus are the latest models. I've
Mhm.
been putting them through their paces. And I've been doing some of this with Ambient too. And over the course of my testing, there have been steps forward and steps backward based on minor, going to air quote minor software updates. So,
Right.
Claude was very, very bad at using tools to manipulate a browser for like 2.5 weeks. And then it got
Hmm.
vastly better. We're talking about going from like a 50% failure rate to like a 10% failure rate. And that was a simple change in the scaffolding around the tools. And so you ask, okay, well, like what's the relevance of that? Well, we have no transparency into the scaffolding right now. And performance regressions and performance improvements are thus completely opaque to us. And
Right.
if our livelihood, as in the case of a developer, depends on having tools that perform in a particular way, then we are in a really tough spot right now. And we are requiring a lot more of people than we typically would require in software.
Right.
We are requiring that people not only be the implementers of really complex workflows, but also be the testers continuously of really complex workflows. Because if the scaffolding
For
is
sure.
changing all the time, you don't know how it's going to end up. So, the way that, and this is called drift, drift can happen at the scaffolding level. It can happen at the model level. It can happen at the routing level. In a black box system, in some sense, it doesn't matter where it happens. It just matters a lot that it can happen at every level and is thus very common in a
Right.
black box system. We know that it's common. Everyone has experienced how common it is. We all saw GPT become sycophantic for a week and then become obnoxious for a week and then sort of drift back to a middle ground.
Right.
But, the way that Ambient deals with this is through verified inference and building common inspectable scaffolding. We're like anyone. We have tool use scaffolds, but ours are going to be open source.
Right.
They're not going to be opaque. They're going to be versioned with careful explanations. And you can also use fully open source tooling with us if you want your own scaffolding. Our scaffolding
And we
are
have
going
3
to be
boxes that people can actually get into and then check for themselves.
Yeah. Like it's all open. And if you want to be on a particular version, like go for it. We don't accept that you have to run a business like Anthropic does, which is by essentially threatening to sue anyone who reverse engineers Claude code.
Right.
We think that it's healthy for people to understand how tools work because then they can use the tools correctly and they can produce stable outcomes. So, the way that we address all of that is, of course, verified inference, but then also through open sourcing our work. And, we're going to be running our own servers with reproducible builds, attestations to the particular software that's running at any given point. We're going to be giving others the ability to do exactly the same thing. And that means that you get a stable performance target.
Right.
Quite simply. And if there are regressions, like you can understand them,